So let's switch gears. Amber Frost has been super patient with us. She is our guest for today. So Amber Frost is a writer and co-host of Chapo Trap House. She's currently completing her first book on the rise of social democratic politics post-2008 financial crisis. Hey, Amber.
Hi, how are you?
Doing okay, hanging in there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's throw out the first question because you wrote an excellent piece in the Catalyst called "The Poison Chalice of #Activism." It was relevant when you wrote it, but it's certainly relevant today, considering all of the #activism we're seeing in response to BLM and also now the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And so you write about the failures of the activism in the essay, and you say, in the larger world, it's difficult to spot a victory or any lasting legacy of power among even hugely popular campaigns like Occupy Wall Street, Arab Spring, Black Lives Matter, Yes All Women, and Me Too. Occupy Wall Street fizzled, the Arab Spring flopped, George Zimmerman walks free, and police murders of black people have not decreased. So in the wake of RBG's death, we're surely going to see a lot of this #activism. Why do you think that it fails? What's missing here, and what can be done moving forward to kind of like learn from those mistakes?
Well, I think if you're talking about the way politics operates at a popular level, there does need to be some kind of actual mechanism to enforce the demands of the people making them. The internet isn't that at all. I mean, it's a billboard. I don't understand exactly the psychology behind people sort of refusing to, accept that. But I think it has something to do with the fact that there doesn't appear to be any other options. So as a result, they're like, well, this is the only thing that we have. So there must be a way to, get this boat airborne. It's just, it doesn't do anything. I don't even, it's sort of difficult to even articulate because it's so obvious at this point, given even, especially since Occupy Wall Street, like how just ineffectual it is. Because the burden of proof should, in fact, be on the techno-triumphalists. They should, in fact, be the people who have to say, but look at what it did. But they sort of sidestep that. So I'm constantly left being like, okay, show me one thing where this is a major factor. And it is very speculative. It seems very, I mean, it's very much like the internet itself. It's very speculative. Its value can't be articulated. It is a bunch of people, speculating on what this might be worth one day when we figure it out. But it seems to be this bubble that just goes on and on and on because it's in everyone's head.
I think it's actually worse than that. I worry, sorry, Nando, just to respond to what Amber said. I think it's worse than that because I think that the #activism has substituted real organizing that needs to take place. And, I don't remember where I read this exactly, but someone was talking about how, biologically speaking, just simply posting about this stuff triggers the same part of your brain as actually going out there and organizing and getting something done, So I worry that, everything has kind of moved to this like online activism that really does take away from more organizing that needs to happen and the work that needs to take place on the ground.
I've heard that argument before and I understand the reasoning behind it. I'm not totally on board, mainly because you're talking about something that, it definitely does give people a sort of high. I mean, there is like a physiological response to just posting. You see all of those, likes and retweets. The idea of it substituting activism, though, implies that these people would be activists without the internet, when in fact there's no medium for them to do that. There are no institutions for them to plug into. I do think it's important to think of the internet as more of a symptom rather than a cause. Nonetheless, it does reinforce our worst habits. So in the piece, I referred to another piece I wrote where I compared it to drug use. And I've told this story before, but it's like, I have a friend who does meth twice a year. She sends the kids off to the grandparents for the weekend. She does meth and she cleans her whole house. So she's never had a problem with meth or any drug. She's a very happy person. She has a nice life, a good marriage. She likes her job. She's financially secure. That is her relationship to drugs. That is her relationship to something that is largely considered, you do it once and your life is over kind of drugs. Because your relationship to drugs is very much mediated by your context. I think the internet for happy people, if the internet was populated by happy people, would not be the sort of destructive force that it is. I think that there's a world out there where the internet is a fun and wholesome and harmless pastime for well-adjusted people. But the fact is that people are suffering, they are in decline, they are alienated, they are atomized. So the internet is what meth is to a lot of miserable people. It's really more about the context of the people that are using it than the actual machinery itself. That said, you're not going to be able to fix it by tinkering with the internet or democratizing the internet or changing the platforms, because it's what you're putting in there, the human content is miserable, desperate people, and you're just never gonna bake a yummy cake with that.
I think my relationship to the internet is much like your friend's relationship to meth. I think I can deal with it, but I see so many people in my life who cannot deal with it, and I'm just.
Well, there's also people who are I can handle it. I'm the one person who can handle it. And it's well,
True.
Maybe you're happy and well-adjusted, but the thing is, when you go in there, you're surrounded by unhappy and poorly adjusted people. So I think some of the few people I know who enjoy Twitter are I only do basketball Twitter. And a lot of them have backed away from it now too, because it has become so politicized. But they're literally sports Twitter or car Twitter, I guess there is. Very technically specific things are some of the only kind of very siloed areas where you can go in and have an interest and interact with people who have that similar interest, and no one's trying to get anyone fired, and there's no tempest in a teapot every week. It's just it's so specific that and the people who are making time for it are just I'm a dad from Philadelphia and I really love the Sixers.
Yeah, for me that's Spanish soccer Twitter. I think all my followers get very confused when I rant about some random player in La Liga. But you talk about in Twitter specifically. I remember when the Arab Spring happened, there was a ton of talk about this is the Twitter revolution, and this is going to be the way revolutions are waged in the future.
And if anything, that moment it made the most sense, not because it was early, but because a lot of the problem was, or a lot of what people identified as the problem was a lack of sort of media transparency.
Right. Yeah, it was an actual a bulletin board, like you said, to get people informed about what was going on. But you talk about in the piece how how few people, at least in the United States, are on Twitter. Because I mean, every single journalist that I've ever known is now like basically full-time on Twitter. But a 2019 Pew Research Center study found that only about 22% of American adults use Twitter, and they tend to be younger and more progressive than the average American. Moreover, about 80% of tweets are produced by 20% of the accounts, meaning the majority of activity on Twitter comes from a very small and ever shrinking number of highly active users. You continue. In February 2019, Twitter publicly announced their active user numbers for the first time. Previously, the company only publicized their user growth, a percentage that was said to be padded with bots and dead accounts. After their grand reveal indicated a much smaller and still shrinking base, they decided to no longer inform the public about their platform's numbers. So there's like, I mean, there's just like a thing that like some annoying libs like Matt Iglesias always say, like, you know, Twitter is not real life, but maybe there's something to that.
I think that's like when people say, you know, the internet isn't real, is this, it's like this very like strange kind of, it isn't real in the way, I mean, if you want to go all Karen Fields about this, like, well, race isn't real, but racism is real.
Right.
The constructs that we built around these myths are in fact incredibly real and have major repercussions. But yeah, nobody's on Twitter. Like, and of course they're playing it, you know, it's, I think that might end up being just, for at least the foreseeable future, the trajectory of social media is that it's going to cycle people out, particularly because people want different things from the internet, depending on their class position, depending on their age. I mean, like, old people like Facebook, millennials like Twitter, especially because it allows them, initially, because it allowed us anonymity. And for people who came over initially, it was, you know, Twitter was it's like a writing exercise. It was like a joke writing exercise in brevity. And you could be anonymous and people would work their shitty day jobs and, you know, have a place to post. Now, because of these kind of, you know, the hashtag activism thing and the way that's been sort of absorbed into the broader media, it's become like LinkedIn for journalists. And it's worse than LinkedIn because they're constantly expected to give takes and press releases. And it's worse than like the crawler at CNN. Remember when they introduced the crawler after 9/11 and like everything had to constantly be updated. And it's like, well, now human beings, like actual like journalists and writers and commentators are expected to give like press releases for every ridiculous thing that happens online. And
absolutely,
it's been, I'd say, I wouldn't say that it has been the cause of a kind of counterproductive activist culture. It has, however, played a major role in exacerbating the kind of deceleration of any kind of like media accountability, any kind of sense of what journalism is. I mean, let's be honest, it was already collapsing. It's been collapsing since television, basically. But I mean, even pre-social media, just the internet offering things for free. So now people are looking for a sort of cheap and easy way to keep a kind of news media economy going, which is now like crowdsourced from a bunch of amateurs who are doing it for free. It's very dystopian. It's definitely been bad for, I mean, you know, people get mad about fake news and Trump lying, and it's like, well, you get your news from Twitter. I mean, there's a broad crisis of trust in this country, and the fact that people get, you know, dumb conspiracy theories or insane ideas from Twitter or Facebook. I mean, it's not. It's understandable Like, you can judge it all you want, but like, think about how many of the legacy media supported the Iraq War just like unquestioningly. Nobody trusts anything. Everyone goes into this big room where everyone is yelling and tries to glean the truth from it.
Yeah, okay, so a few points. First off, I can't even begin to tell you how comforting it was to read the stats from Pew Research.
I live to comfort.
No, but I know that you actually did decide to get off Twitter. So let me start off with like a personal question. Did you notice a difference in your quality of life by logging off?
Well, I actually am one of those extremely ruthless people who doesn't. I mean, I get canceled like once every 3 months, I guess.
That's the right way to do it. But if you're not getting canceled on a regular basis, you're not doing anything right. Like,
I don't. It never really bothered me. My whole thing is like, what are you gonna do? Take away my birthday? Come get me. Like, I don't care because I never really had a job that anyone could fire me from. So it wasn't so much, and I do think like the whole like public shaming pylon thing is toxic. It is horrible. I think the whole there is no cancel culture thing is cruel and gaslighting and deeply unsympathetic to people who are not as like cold and heartless as me. The main thing, though, that I noticed from leaving social media, and I left after, again, it became sort of like LinkedIn for journalists, because I remember when it was funny jokes. It was still, by the way, an incredibly mean, nasty place, but it was funny, and it wasn't people taking themselves seriously. And there was a sense, I think maybe a healthier sense, that like this is not going to affect the real world. You know, we're talking shit, as we would say back home. When I left, the main thing I noticed was my attention span improved a lot. And I had like a timeline that I realized after like a week, I was reading entire articles, not just skimming. After like 2 weeks, I was reading the entire like newspaper. I was reading like FT minus the Market Watch section. And I think like a month I like read Moby Dick. Like it was like my ability to, and I've always had a very kind of ADHD brain. So I thank God I didn't like grow up with the internet as a child, because I mean, God knows that would have exacerbated it so much. We know very well that it's actually quite bad for your development to stare at screens, and there's something physical about the scrolling, and fundamentally, like, our little neuroplastic children's brains are programmed to learn in a certain way. So I'm just so glad that I lived in some like hillbilly town where we couldn't get anything but dial up for a million years. Because leaving the internet was, yes, it was also like nice to not have to hear about just silly nonsense all the time and not be surrounded by hysteria all the time. But just on a personal level, it was genuinely, the difference was pretty rapid. My ability to absorb, retain, and work through information was greatly improved.
I want to go back to what you said about the cancel culture, because I agree with you that I find it genuinely bizarre that even a lot of people I generally respect, kind of insist that it just doesn't exist. And I think that those are people that maybe have never worked like in a newsroom. I don't know. Like I remember when I worked in a newsroom, it was like that was such a mechanism to enforce orthodoxy, right? And it was they kind of used the like woke canceling to enforce orthodoxy. But the flip side of what happens on Twitter, and it was like a quote in your piece that really struck me, is almost that there's like that going on, and then the exact opposite, in which, because you're surrounded by such like-minded people, you think like the revolution is around the corner. And you write that despite the fact that the left has lost every major battle since the civil rights movement, the internal culture of American leftists remains curiously plagued by a delirious revolutionary triumphalism accompanied by sunny denial.
Right.
Can you expand on that? Like, what's the problem with that?
Well, I mean, like, again, that's something that's often very endemic just to sort of youth politics more broadly. I'm not sure that you could say that it began and ended with the internet. Certainly, there were a ton of, leftists in the 60s and in the 30s in America who were like, the revolution is coming, and guess what? It never came. Nonetheless, you don't see the rapidity. It was at least based on like legitimate things. It was, or at least single identifiable things. And with the internet, particularly with Twitter, it's like, oh, this week it's Occupy Wall Street. It's going to be a revolution. This week it's Ferguson. This week it's Black Lives Matter too, even though it didn't work the first time. Maybe this time it'll be different. This week it's the Women's March. This week it's just everything. Everything is about to be the revolution. So I don't know. That's the sort of triumphalism of leftists, particularly young ones. That's not new, but the rapid turnover of every like few months, there's a new thing that's about to be the revolution. And it's not purely left either. I mean, it goes into the right. It goes into that's how you know the internet is a factor, because the right is doing it as well. Right. The right, saying there's going to be like remember during Trump, all the kind of like predictions they had for the way he's going to like change America and throw Hillary Clinton in jail. And the liberals certainly remember the impeachment stuff. They're like, it's all happening every day. Everyone is like, it's all happening. But really, nothing is happening at all. We're kind of in a stasis. What's happening is that we're continuing, politically speaking, the general trajectory of Obama, sort of like a slow, gradual downward, misery path. And maybe it speeds up sometimes, and there are little dips here and there. And there are more visible there are quite a few more visible major kind of like activist moments. But mostly it's kind of on autopilot. Twitter's just sort of watching it.
I remember the Billy Idol quote, where he's like, in the 70s, we were all punks like, screaming our face off, and Margaret Thatcher.
Yeah, all that screaming and Thatcher still got in.
Yeah, whatever, yeah. Nothing changes.
So you touch on the, kind of like the incentive structure behind the nonstop posting, how people have kind of made careers out of it. You write, hyper-entrepreneurialism is not only a feature rather than a bug of social media activism. It is the native fauna of liberalism online. Online is where it thrives, and with far more resilience than any movement attempting to build a social base with hashtags. So it kind of goes back to what you were also talking about. Something happens, and all of a sudden anyone who's even remotely tied to the media feels like they need to put out their hot take, and there's like, it's almost as if people's material needs depend on it. And it personally drives me crazy, because that's when people react out of emotion and post the dumbest stuff. That's not helpful. It's not productive. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Never.
I mean, I've certainly posted dumb things, but when RBG died, you go on Twitter and everyone's like posting like some of the most ridiculous.
Are they? I wouldn't know.
I know.
There's
That's
some
why I
good
think I'm
ones.
going to go
There
your
were some
route.
good
I think you're
ones.
doing it right. I mean, good if you want to like pull your hair out.
Yeah, I'll have to talk about it on the podcast later, which is going to be interesting because with like a lot of, because I'm on a like a sort of talk comedy political podcast, and a lot of what they talk about now, I have to say, okay, translate this to me, because I read the news. I'm not on Twitter. So what you're talking about is a very micro world. I don't think it's totally irrelevant to politics, because it certainly reflects a kind of like a highly active, political subculture of kind of professional managerial elites. But at the same time, its influence on the world is, let's say, very difficult to measure. Yeah. Anyway, sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Yeah, I think you're right in that it's difficult to measure, and I think you're also right that it's a small group of people who tweet incessantly. Their hot takes are endless, but those tend to also be the same people who get invited onto CNN or other cable news networks to share their expert punditry. So it does snowball.
That phrase is so disgusting too. Expert punditry. Like the whole idea of a pundit is that they're a dilettante. And I don't mean that as an insult. I am a dilettante. I assemble a lot of different, ideas and interests to come up with an opinion that is not particularly expertise based. The opposite of me, politically speaking, would be like a wonk, or someone like Matt Iglesias, who believes himself to be something of a numbers man rather than a broad strokes guy. But yeah, I mean, I think the thing I would say is that Twitter is better at creating careers than it is about creating social movements. Believe me, I know.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's probably a good place to wrap it up. I mean, Amber, if you want to stick along, we're going to make fun of some stuff. Or if you need to leave, we understand. But, happy to have you on, or happy to say goodbye.
Yeah.
Great.